Hi, I'm Julia Hankins, and I work with kids yoga teachers to help them feel more organised, more confident, so they can earn more money in their kids yoga business. And so today I'm going to be talking to you all about a obstacle course, a yoga obstacle course. So you may have heard it before, it may be completely new to you, but yoga obstacle courses are absolutely great for those times where you just don't have it in you, where your mojo is low and your energy levels are not where you wish they would be. Or it's also really useful for those times when you've got a mixture of groups of children and you're not quite sure what to do with them, if they're new to you or if they're a whole mix of age ranges. And so this works particularly well if you're unwell, or if your energy is low, or if you're limited on time for planning. Or, like I say, if you have a group of children and they're a complete mix of ages and you're not quite sure what to do with them, it works well because the younger children have like short, sharp activities where there's lots of novelty and change, and that appeals to them. And the older children have lots of independence, and so that appeals to them. So, that's why an obstacle course might be useful to you. But what is an obstacle course? What is a yoga obstacle course? Well, it's basically like a carousel of activities or stations where children move from one to the other and they experience a different yoga prop at each station. That's basically what it is. Um, and so, how you set it up is ideally you'd be in the room or the setting before the children, and you would put these little stations of different props at each station. I like to do it in a circle if there's space, but it's good to know which is your first and you like have a route way. And so, you set up the little spaces either with or without mats. This is totally fine to do without mats, and it's also, this works in a classroom too. If you're having to work in a classroom, this can work around the room in at different tables, for example. So yeah, you set it up around the classroom, and then children will travel from each place going around the room and experiencing different props at each station. So, which props to use? Well, really, you can use anything, and I would say whatever you've got. Use whatever you have. How many different stations will depend on how long you've got. How many children you've got, the space that you've got, the amount of props that you've got. But you basically want to make sure that you've got enough props so that the children in their groups each have a go of using that prop. So if, for example, you're thinking that they'll go around in groups of, I don't know, like 3 or 4, then you're going to need at least 3 or 4 of each prop at each station, so that everybody gets a go of everything. So yeah, I like to use my top 10 favourite props, and if you'd like to know what those are, then you can check out my freebie, and it's called Top of the Props, and I'll link it below in the video. But really, you could use anything, whatever you've got: soft toys, pictures, books, balls, bells, anything that you have, you can use in your obstacle course. So here are my tips for making an obstacle course not so stressful, because they could be really, really overwhelming if the organisation isn't there, especially if you're not feeling at your best anyway. So having your head around how it's going to work for you and being organised before is really useful. So firstly, I would allow children to go round in friendship groups, and that might mean that you've got different sized of numbers of children, and that's totally fine as long as you've got enough props for each station for that group. That's fine. Don't worry about that. And having them allowed to work with their friends means that they're more likely to interact in a much more involved way, because they'll already feel comfortable and confident with their friends. And the only time that I would change this is if they're not being safe with their friends, or if they're distracting other people, or in some way it's causing a problem. But generally, I allow children to be with their friends. Another tip is to make sure that every single child experiences every single activity that is on offer. And so it's really important that you keep them in their groups and that they stay in their group going around the activities, because if they have a little go on that and then one person goes there and one person goes there, then it's really difficult to monitor and make sure that everybody's had a turn at everything. So keeping them in their groups will help to make sure that that happens. So once they're in the group, they stay in their group. And then also timing how long they're going to be in each station is really useful too. And so you could plan that ahead of the lesson. You could work out how many stations you've got, how much time you've got, and divide the amount of time you've got by the number of stations you've got. And that means that you can set a timer and they can have that long on that station, and then they move around, and that helps you feel a bit more in control and helps you to know that everybody's going to get a turn. A fun way of handling that, a fun way of managing that, is by having some music. I used to, when I did this in my after school yoga classes, I used to have a playlist of songs that were roughly the same length of time, and then when the music stopped, that would be their signal that their time has ended, and it felt like a very natural ending of that particular time because the music would stop. And it's also good to have some sort of signal to get the children's attention. You may well have this in your yoga class anyway, normally, so it could be something like ringing the bells or something like that, so that it saves your voice and so children know they need to stop when the bell is rung. And then getting them to put everything back into the bag or whatever is there at that station. I tend to have bags at my stations. I'll just show you a little example. So I tend to use like these kind of drawstring bags for each station, and that helps me be organised, and it helps the children be organised too, that when they finish with our activity they put everything back in the bag ready for the next group. So the next thing that I would say is a top tip for making your yoga obstacle course work well for you is having a clear route way. And I already said at the beginning that I find a circle really helps here, because everybody starts at their station and then they all move like anti-clockwise or clockwise. And if you've got a lot of children, or if you've got particularly bubbly children, then I would also set a boundary that we wait until everybody's got their resources back in their bags, and then I would send them a group at a time. You go to the next station, you go to the next station. Otherwise, it can be a bit chaotic with everybody running around and you can't see who's doing what. And so it works well as well if you choose one team to come and stand in the middle while the other children work around and then they go to their station. That can work well. So having a clear route way and having it in your mind the direction that they're going, because there will always be at least one child who's like, what? Where am I going? What am I doing? Okay, so another tip would be not having too many noisy things. So if you've got a station with some instruments, for example, just keep it to one station. Otherwise it's going to get really loud really, really quickly, and that's just not going to be enjoyable for anyone. So make sure noisy things are kept to a minimum, and also messy things or things that have lots of little pieces, keep those to a minimum too, because unless you've got a really small group and a lot of time, it can be quite stressful to make sure it's all back, and it can be difficult for you when you're tidying up afterwards. It can be a bit overwhelming. So keeping mess and noise to a minimum. And what else? Oh yeah, another tip is having cards to organise. So I have they're called yoga obstacle cards, and I put them at each station, and they have some suggestions and some pictures and some ideas of what to do, so that if children arrive there they've got an idea of what they could do, but don't be too fixed with what you expect them to do with the resources. Let them just explore and have fun. But it's really helpful to have those cards at each station, because it kind of sets a kind of precedent that like this is what you can do, and give some ideas for that. And if you would like to see mine, or you can download them, I've got a freebie, I'll put a link in this video too, and you can download them and use them straight as they are, or you can just use them as an idea of how to organize your own if your props are different to mine. There are a lot of there, and I wouldn't use all of my cards in one go because that would be too many stations, but I just included as many as I could, so that with the hope that if you downloaded them, then you would have at least some of the props so you could use them straight away. So that's using cards at each station. So when would you use yoga obstacle courses? So I use them when I'm not very well, like if I've got period pain, or if I'm emotionally low, if something's happened in my personal life and I don't feel I've got the capacity to lead or to be out there. And I also use them at times like the end of term. They can be really useful for an end of term class, particularly if the children are feeling end of termy. They're good for them as well. I tend to just keep these activities, the obstacle course, just for my after school clubs or community classes. I don't tend to use them for my curriculum classes because I have a whole different plan and structure for how those lessons work. But it's definitely a really useful tool to have in your yoga teacher tool belt. So yeah, check out my freebie, which is the what's it called, yoga obstacle course, and you can download that below. And if you'd like to know more about using props, then check out my training, which is called Props Like a Pro, and that's going to be talking about all things managing props and how to use them effectively in your yoga lessons to help you be more confident and more organized, so that you can feel confident charging more and being more profitable in your yoga business. So let me know if you yourself use I don't know what happened to my voice, and you yourself use yoga obstacle. That's a real like tongue twister. Let me know if you yourself use yoga obstacle courses and what your favourite props are to use. I'd really love to hear from you. And if you're interested in working with me, send me an email, julia@juliahankins.co.uk. I'd love to hear from you.